And we're back.
Hey, hey, hey.
What's going on, Chris?
Oh, not a whole lot. Just the usual week, it feels like. It's been a little bit since we've chatted.
Yeah, last week we had schedule conflicts and laziness conflicts.
And what's funny is, I think it was last week, I ended up being on a different podcast. So it felt like I still recorded an episode with you, but it turns out I didn't.
You met your 1 a week quota. I met a 0
Right.
a week quota.
Right. You were also on. I was on Jason Sweat's, what is it, a Ruby testing podcast?
Yeah.
And you were on that. Yeah. I haven't had a chance to listen to yours, but it was a fun chat, you know. There's a lot of interesting things that I don't talk about testing a whole lot, mostly because I'm not that concerned about it in most cases. But it was a great discussion to have about. We talked a lot about, you know, writing tests that are actually useful and not wasting a whole lot of time, and then, you know, getting things small, very small and focused on the right things. So it was good. So yeah, we'll have to include a link to both of our episodes in the notes.
Has yours dropped yet?
No, it has not. It will probably shortly.
Cool. Yeah, I think mine came out like a week after, maybe a week and a half. So
yeah, mine might be next week or something. But yeah.
Anything else good?
Oh, not really. How about you?
About the same. Just waiting on a baby.
Yeah, I've been waiting on that for how many weeks now? It's been a long time.
Weeks. He was like trying to come out early, and then it was like safe for him to come out. And he's like, "No, I'm good. Just gonna
is this a sign of future personality?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know if I hope so or not. This one we have's pretty crazy, so I wouldn't mind a chill kid.
Yeah, that'd be great. Oh man, you got your hands full.
Yep. So, several things we can chat about today. I made a list. The first is, did you see Eileen's post from GitHub about upgrading from 3.2 to 5.2? Yeah,
I did. I forget most of the details because I read it a while ago, but yeah, that was a great thing to hear that GitHub has made it up to the latest version of Rails, which is fantastic. And then it sounds like, you know, from her talk about Rails 6 being scalable by default, that, you know, they're trying to bake in a lot of those features of multiple databases and stuff like that into Rails 6, probably so they can make that upgrade process for GitHub a lot easier this time around.
Yeah, no doubt. The other cool thing that they're pulling out of that, or maybe they're not pulling out of that, but they're putting in Rails 6 is the parallel testing, by default.
That'll be great.
Yeah, because there's a couple of gems out there that have made it pretty easy to do, but it'll be nice to have it baked in as a standard.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. Yeah, it seems kind of like a feature that might as well be there by default.
The other thing from that article that was really fascinating is how they did the upgrade. So
yeah, I don't remember what happened. How did that work?
So essentially, they had 2 versions of Rails, and they did it kind of incrementally. So I think it was 3.2 and 4.1 or 4.2. And what they did was, if I remember correctly, they had 2 gem files. And then they also, with CI, the test had to pass on the old version of Rails and the new version of Rails.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, you see a lot of gems do that when they need to test compatibility with older versions of Rails. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, she said it essentially kind of primed the devs to learn how to make it pass for 2 versions. And then once it was all green on 4.2, then they'd bump those up. So the minimum version was 4.2 and the next version's 5.0. And they did that gradually until they got to 5.2. And I was like, that's really smart.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's you know, most of the time I would bet you that it wouldn't be that hard to pick out sort of the differences between those versions when, like, you will quickly find out what you've tied to something internally in Rails that causes it to break in a new version or whatever. Like that's probably the majority of their issues were not so much, it probably was all entirely like these features that, you used against some internal Rails thing, because it's GitHub. They're going to be building a very complicated application, which probably needs to hook into some of the internals of Rails. And so those are probably the hardest things to upgrade when they get refactored inside of Rails in a major release.
Yeah, the other cool thing about it was essentially like doing it that way. There was, from what I understood, it was like a small team of people actually doing like the upgrades. And because they were like doing this dual version thing, they were able to actually still like have the rest of the team like delivering new features. So it wasn't like, let's just like slam on the brakes and upgrade. So that was pretty cool. That
is very cool. It sounds like what you would absolutely have to do in a company like that. Like there's no slowing down, especially for them. They've got a lot of fierce competition now with GitLab and everything, so they can't take a year off just to do a Rails upgrade.
Yeah. And there was one more thing about that I was going to say. The only thing that like sucked about the whole thing was actually nothing with like GitHub. It was just the dumpster fire of comments on Hacker News. Like,
yeah, that's gotten bad in the recent years.
The like first comment was, or like one of the like main threads, like themes in the thread was, like it's that hard to upgrade Rails. Like, why do you use Rails? And it was like, well, that's a little unfair. Like,
yeah, but these people aren't like thoughtful on Hacker News anymore. Like it used to be very thoughtful, but they're just like, oh, then your tools must suck. And you're like, nah, it turns out like you're building stuff at ultra scale. Like GitHub is massive. So no matter what framework you used, you're going to have trouble no matter what. That's why, like, Twitter had to go build everything from scratch at a point too, And surprisingly, Shopify and GitHub are still using Rails to this day, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was a fun read, a less fun scroll through the comments. But the other cool thing is I've heard it read a couple of places. I've seen it a couple of places where they talk about now that they're at 5.2, like GitHub can actually start like contributing things to Rails now, which is cool.
Yeah, right. And which makes perfect sense why, Eileen was talking about that new Rails 6 stuff for databases and whatever. It makes perfect sense because then they can contribute a lot of their stuff from production into there, which I'm sure was all custom written and everything. So that'll be awesome. We can take advantage of some of that stuff. And one of those new things we can take advantage of is ActionText. Did you see that?
I did. So did that came out of Basecamp though, right?
Yeah, right. Sorry, bad transition.
No, I saw it, but I haven't like watched the video on it. I know the premise, but please tell me more about it.
It's cool. It was just hilarious. Jason Fried actually posted a video like, I don't know, a month ago or something about, talking about how Basecamp works and how they chose some design thing or whatever. And as I was watching the video in the background, like on their Basecamp that he's showing, it has like a couple mentions of ActionText. And I paused the video and was like, wait a minute. I think I figured out what they're going to release.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it's basically nothing special. It is a default configured version of Trix that will integrate with Rails and active storage. So you can have a rich text editor that will sanitize stuff by default. It will have image galleries. You can upload images. That will automatically connect with active storage, and you don't have to touch a thing, which is cool. So you get sort of a lot of people in Rails being developers like Markdown, and you kind of get the markdown like HTML pipeline functionality, but with actual HTML, because Trix is not a markdown editor, it's HTML WYSIWYG. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, it seems like a small feature to most people, it seems like, from what I've seen, but it's a pretty common feature that you need a WYSIWYG and you need to output that as well, and it works. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm interested in it. I don't know how often I'll use it, but I guess it's a good thing to have around.
Yeah, I mean, for any comments or whatever that you want formatting or blog posts or, any type of thing in your app that you want editable with formatting, that's probably a good place to use it. The big feature of it really is just that you don't have to touch a line of JavaScript to build your file uploading integration, which has always been kind of the pain of WYSIWYGs. You get the editor, and then it's like, oh yeah, and use this API to fill out your file uploading, and you're like, but how? And and then you're like, how do I do it to S3 and whatever? And it's like a real pain in the butt. So that you don't even have to touch, which is kind of cool.
So the other thing I read in the blog post was that there's I think it's in the blog post, that there's 3 other libraries they're wanting to pull in. And I'm really curious to know what those are.
Yeah, I wonder what those were. I certainly would appreciate one that supports @mentions. I think that one is a majorly missing feature of a WYSIWYG editor at this point. Because you could build. So for example, you could turn off all of the formatting functionality and just hide all those buttons for bold and whatever, but you could add maybe or leave @mentions on and recreate your Twitter form. And they've got a really nice looking @mentions feature in Basecamp, but when you try and look how other people are solving that problem, it's gnarly. It is not good. So I'm hoping that something like that becomes another feature they add officially.
Yeah, so I think the way I read it was that the 3 other things they want to add are like ActionText. They're not necessarily Trix or ActionText specific. They're other extractions from Basic that they want to put in.
Cool. I like it. I think, I'm sure I've talked about this on, maybe I haven't, but I really feel like we need at this point sort of a higher level of abstraction. You see people reinventing the wheel with all kinds of things constantly. People are rewriting their registrations and forgot your password stuff from scratch or whatever. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Rails is flexible enough where we should just have some sort of official default that we can change or whatever. And so, I believe that even should go into the front end side of things too, where we have things that we choose to put in or whatever. I saw Javon tweeted okay, time to start generating Rails apps with -- skip ActionText.
Yeah, I saw that. And so that's actually a thing that I wanted to talk about, because there was in the Ruby Reddit the ActionText post, I guess, and people are like, this is cool, but why do we still not have user authentication or authorization baked in, registration, things like that? And I was like, yeah, I kind of feel that exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
That is I know we probably talk about Laravel more when we talk about Rails, but that is one of the things that even though it's a small thing, the fact that when you scaffold a new Laravel app, it just has all the user stuff taken care of, and you can skip it, but that would be so nice.
Yeah, I think the important piece here is that if we got everyone using the same system, we would be able to keep all those applications up to date and just more reliable, and it would be more flexible. We'd have better documentation for it because people would manipulate it in different ways. And like Devise does a pretty good job of conquering the market right now, but I don't think they're working on it a whole lot anymore. Maybe it doesn't need a whole lot of work, which is totally valid too. But I mean, people still want to see there's activity on it. And I think it was like not updated super well for the latest Rails version or something. I mean, some of those projects are getting to be a little bit more stagnant for new releases. Like they're not ready ahead of time. Like we really need those things like ready a month ahead of time before the new versions release.
Plus, too, like, I don't know how to say this, I guess. Like, I would be really interested to see what a Basecamp abstraction of that would look like. Like, because usually when they come out with stuff like this, they bake into Rails, like, it's usually like a few liners. Like, I'd just be really interested to see what that looks like. So,
yeah. And theirs is like something they couldn't straight abstract either, which is that may be the reason why they don't do it, is they can't really extract it because they have that single sign-on site like launchpad or something.basecamp.com or 37signals.com, where you log into that and then you choose which account to go launch. So they don't have like a traditional setup for that either, which is interesting. I always love reading their code too, by the way. Like it's always sort of a different take on how I wouldn't have written things the way they do generally. And then I read it and I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. It's kind of fun to see that because it's usually like written just different enough that I'm like, huh, that gives me some ideas.
So I wonder, like, I have no experience, as we talked about with Richard, like I have no experience like doing anything with Rails open source, mostly because it intimidates the crap out of me. But like, do you think that's a thing where like if somebody started like an issue or like a pull request there, like what do you think the response to that would be for like a baked in user setup? Like I don't even know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but that's why I think it would be good to open an issue. I mean, I just did this so I've been experimenting with using maybe the ASDF version manager on Hatchbox so that you can deploy Node.js apps or like deploy static apps or, Erlang, whatever, some other options. And so I like open an issue for that because I was like, hey, I use this feature from RBEnv to set environment variables per project. And I want to add that to ASDF. It's fantastic. But you don't have any hooks for plugins. So I opened an issue and asked about it. And unfortunately, the answer was kind of like, well, we haven't thought about every single use case we possibly want to support. So I don't think we're going to do anything right now. And I was like, man, like you don't need you don't need to fully think through all of these things. Like you can add the hook and then change it later. It's okay. Like that's software development. You add a feature and then as you learn more, then you can adjust the feature. And I was like, well, I don't know that we need to know everything. So I kind of did that approach and didn't get necessarily the response I was hoping. But it's really easy because people are open to ideas usually. And I mean, the Rails community is the hard part is you want to figure out how to get in line with sort of what their goals of the framework is. And it's always kind of, for Rails, not really felt like it was all encompassing of things. So you may not get a great response. And they have so many issues that are filed that sometimes they can be pretty terse, short, and then close them. But it's, that's what comes with managing a large project like that.
Yeah, I guess like that's always the thing is maybe it's like my insecurities, but like I'm even like, I don't even know if I want to open this. Like, what if it's not in line and they're like, no, this is stupid. Like I've had that happen before and I'm like, it makes me feel not so great after. So not their fault, just my own problems with myself. But
no, I understand that. I think it's worth just doing. And I mean, it's important. These projects evolve in the direction that the community pushes it. So if you don't open issues like that and show the community that that's a point of interest, then like they may not know and they may not ever go that direction or whatever. So I think it's good to do that stuff, even if you get some kind of shitty response. It's important for that to become to put it up on their radar, just so that they're aware.
Yeah. Cool. What else? Oh, you should talk about staging environments.
Yeah, I made a note a while back, in the similar vein to this conversation about like, why the hell doesn't Rails have a staging environment by default? Like it's a copy paste of the production file for the most part. And like, those little things are like, why don't we just have that automatically done for if 75% of users are going to set up a staging environment in like a real production-esque way, then like, why not just have that ready to go? It just seemed like something that crossed my mind as I was working on one of our projects. And yeah, it just was like, why don't we have that? Why do I have to go and create the like staging environment myself? Seemed weird. Just given how common it is for any business to have a staging environment, and Rails has always felt to me like the sort of entrepreneur's framework, or Laravel feels that way a lot as well. And that's what interests me about this is like these frameworks were designed so that one or two people could go build an entire business by themselves. So the idea of having like a staging environment pre-configured makes it feels so in line with that. And maybe that's the thing that, you're getting at with the suggestion of adding a user authentication system. Like, I don't know that authorization makes as much sense, but authentication for sure does, where you support email and password login. You maybe have some basic API authentication that comes with that, or OmniAuth as well. But that just kind of shows your alignment towards building a framework for building entrepreneurial, like building businesses, not just generic applications or something. And I would definitely be interested in that direction. But maybe that's not really what maybe they want to support that, but maybe they don't want that to be sort of the defaults or something. I'm not sure. But I also can't think of any apps that don't need authentication these days.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, it probably just comes down to like, what is the overall direction and like vision of the framework? And maybe that just like doesn't align with like what I think. Like, I don't know.
Maybe. I also don't necessarily know that they know. Like we're getting kind of random stuff. Like, ActionText is great and all, but it's not a major step forward in the framework. It's like something we should have had a long time ago. Like file upload and active storage should have been a feature of Rails. I think since the early days, like Rails 3 or something. File uploading is so common. Like everybody is maintaining Paperclip and Carrier Wave and Shrine and Refile, and there were several other ones. And then there's whole entire companies like File Upload IO or File Stack, whatever it's called. There's a whole bunch of other ones too that just do file uploading. Like, man, active storage feels like a little bit, it's number one, it's very narrow. Like it really doesn't, it allows you to upload files and then generate like a preview, but like there's no great integration with it to do like other transformations on videos, even though their API makes it sound like that. So you can't go and easily add some sort of video transcoding and then have other blobs of other formats. It really only allows you to extract images from your uploads, which feels way too specific or whatever and not flexible enough, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, I don't know where the framework's direction is. And I don't think they talk about it much, and they may not know because there's so many people that contribute to Rails that it's kind of like, well, whatever the community wants to do or whatever we feel like extracting from Basecamp. So I don't know.
I guess you also like when a framework is like this mature is the word I'll use. Like maybe that stuff like matters a little less. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, that could be.
Last thing I wanted to chat about, which really like I haven't experienced, but I've seen this year more people talk about it than in the previous years, is Hacktober is going on right now. So the DigitalOcean sponsored, what is it, like do 3 pull requests to an open source project, get a free t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did that 1 year. But I'm not much of an open source contributor as I necessarily like to be. But I noticed this year that there's been a couple of people talking about the increase in just like pull request spam because of it. So like pull requests that really don't do anything, like add like a word to a README or like just like add smiley faces and stuff. And I just found that kind of really interesting. Like,
yeah,
I wonder how frustrating that is for open source maintainers.
Yeah, I think it's one thing if you're correcting typos in a repo, but if you're just adding spam, that's pretty sad. And yeah, I mean, it's a self-promotion thing for DigitalOcean, so they're, just treating it as marketing. And, the sad part is like, I guess if that's happening, then they're just kind of ruining other people's communities.
Yeah, like,
which seems terrible.
Just, I don't know, just send out free t-shirts. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
not really DigitalOcean's fault. Like,
it's the wrong incentives, It's like, give you a t-shirt if you do anything, period. And it's like, there's no bar of quality to that. It maybe be more interesting if they were like, launch an app, like launch a product or something, and then like, link us to the website or I don't know what. But I'm sure they get so much volume that they can't monitor that stuff. But yeah, that's interesting. I had seen, that it was Hacktober again, and I always get annoyed with that because I'm like, it doesn't, I'm just like, contribute to open source whenever. Like, you don't have to wait until you get a free t-shirt for it.
Right.
But yeah, plenty of people want them.
I think Richard's code triage is like a good approach to like getting people to contribute open source. Like kind of like, I don't know, maybe even like they work together. I don't know. Interesting. Not a problem I have because the few open source projects I do have like don't have people just hitting them up. So
yeah. I don't know about an idea for that, but yeah, I love code triage. It's such a great idea.
Well, that is all I have to chat about today. You got anything else?
I don't think so. Actually, one thing I'll briefly mention is last night I forgot that I was chatting with one of my friends and we were talking about I forgot how we got on the topic, but one thing that this is kind of totally a random topic, but people who ask about like what are the best practices for this or that was what we got talking about, and sort of like their mindset behind that. They just want to shortcut to having a perfect app or perfect code, and we were talking about how like weird that is because it's so totally opposite to how coding actually works, where you don't know the edge cases and things ahead of time, and those emerge from actually doing the work and building stuff. And there's no possible way for you to have best practices because every problem is, different quite a bit. Some of the simpler things will, be replicatable or whatever, but there's no, we don't have best practices on API authentication because you might need to do or support different things. And so there's a lot of talk about, should we use JWTs or should we do this or do that? And it's interesting to see that. So we just happened to brush on that topic last night of jumping to that, like design patterns or best practices or whatever, to try and find some generic advice that flatly solves all your problems is kind of a funny statement just to think about. But anyways, that was the random topic that I almost forgot to mention. I just thought it was a interesting thought.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is, like, I've heard it said that the problem is not like learning design patterns and things like that. It's just using them when you don't need to use them. Like, like when you learn a design pattern, you just immediately apply it to a project before like really like fleshing out how the project is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you can't do any of that before you know the problem inside and out, and then you're like, oh, it perfectly fits this or whatever, but you can't start from the outside in and make it fit some mold if you're going to do a good job of building that project. Like you, the way that software development works is we can't wrap our heads around everything when we get started. So we have to start coding and figure out where those edge cases are, the weird things that you need to handle. And then you let that drive your design later on. And maybe it fits one of those, maybe it doesn't, whatever. Doesn't really matter, but we can give it a name to those if we see those approaches happen. That's why it's a pattern, because you've seen it multiple times. But you can't usually know until you dive into it and figure out what the right accomplish that is, because you can paint yourself into a corner really easily. But you're really looking for something that solves your problem pretty well, but also makes it very changeable later. So,
yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. So anyway, that was my last thought.
Well, I have more stuff, but probably more time than we have. So I say we call it a day.
Sounds good. Good catching up. And I guess we will talk to you guys next week, hopefully, unless there's a new baby here.
And even then, we might still talk next week.
Great. Yeah.
One thing that I'll mention is if you are interested in this podcast and knowing when episodes come out, I have now wired it up with our hosting service Transistor to actually tweet out to Remote Ruby anytime we post an episode. So that's at remote_Ruby. And
on Twitter.
I'm pretty bad about putting out when we have new episodes into the world. So, yeah.
Awesome. That'll be great. Just keep people up to date.
Cool. Well, have a good week and let's chat again soon.
Sounds good.